views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
The Bronx will be getting a new borough president after 12 years. Ruben Diaz Jr. is retiring after representing the borough since 2009. The outgoing borough president has served the boogie down through significant transitional times. He's dedicated himself with passion and rhymes through the hard and the good times. Welcome to the People's Candidate Forum 3.0. The Bronx is hiring. I'm Jessica Clemente, CEO of We Stay Nos Quedamos. Nos Quedamos is based in the Melrose section of the South Bronx and is proud to have been an agent for change with over 25 years of community-led affordable housing development, advocacy, and work for the preservation of open space, environmental health, and social justice. Today we are at Willis Avenue Community Garden preparing to interview 5 candidates looking to take on the role of Bronx leader. The People's Candidate Forum is produced by Nos Quedamos, BronxNet TV in partnership with the Mott Herald, Hunts Point Express, and the city. Although we know the borough president, do we really know the responsibilities and the goals? The goal of the forum and our education series is to make this election more accessible to the people of the Bronx, emphasizing the importance of being informed when you decide who to vote for. We believe the community deserves no less, and that's why we partner with this steering committee comprised of all the incredible organizations in the Bronx to bring you this nonpartisan event, encouraging informed and active participation in government, increasing understanding of major public policy issues, and influencing public policy through education and advocacy. In creating the interview process, we sent each interviewee what we perceive to be a job description for borough president. The BP is responsible for 1, ensuring each resident gets a say in how the borough's land gets used. 2, appointing community board members who reflect the interests of their neighborhoods. 3, managing and distributing taxpayers' money responsibly. 4, speaking out as borough's primary advocate with elected officials and agencies citywide, including the mayor. We are hoping through these interviews that candidates will demonstrate how they plan on approaching their new position and aligning their responsibilities with the matters that are critical to implementing effective solutions that will propel the South Bronx forward. We formatted these interviews this way in order to allow the public to develop a deeper understanding of their candidates and the issues they will be prioritizing while in office. We hope this will help residents of the Bronx make an informed decision before voting in the Democratic primary on June 22nd. All candidates for borough president have received an invitation to this forum. 5 out of 5 have responded and will participate today. All candidates' interviewees will be asked the same questions with the same time constraints. Questions have been provided by the public and local community organizations. Conducting the interviews, we have 2 media professionals who have covered the South Bronx in different capacities. First, we have Mr. Joe Hirsch, who has been the editor-in-chief of the Mott Herald and the Hunts Point Express since 2013. Both news sites are staffed by reporters from CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Mr. Hirsch has been reporting from the South Bronx for over a decade regarding all aspects of the neighborhood. Followed by Ms. Sonyi Lopez. She's a South Bronx resident and community journalist at BronxNet TV. Ms. Lopez is passionate about highlighting the true Bronx, its artists, activists, and movers and shakers. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for the People's Candidate Forum.
Welcome to the People's Candidate Forum. The Bronx is hiring. My name is Joe Hirsch.
And I'm Sonyi Lopez. Today we're joined by all 5 candidates for borough president. Thank you all for your interest in representing the Bronx. Before we get into our interview questions and review your qualifications, can you tell us in 1 sentence why you have decided to run for BP?
You need leadership that has experience to bring this county to where it should be. Now, I've been involved in public service for over 30 years, as a state senator for the last 3.5, as an assemblyman for 6, almost 10 years of public service. If you look at my record and you compare it to the candidates, you'll see that I am the most prolific legislator of all the candidates. I am certainly the most progressive and the most prepared.
Making sure we have a borough president that will be a champion for the people, someone who's unafraid to make tough decisions, someone who is a coalition builder and can truly take the Bronx to the next renaissance.
Well, I love this borough too much to sit back and not try to help make it better.
In one sentence, I want to keep the citizens of the Bronx safe.
I love the Bronx, and we have a tremendous need for true, proven leadership.
Our first question is a business question. Almost 85% of businesses in the Bronx's commercial corridors are small businesses. It is estimated that our borough has lost 40% of its mom and pop stores as a result of the pandemic. Should you take office, what would you do to revitalize the borough's commercial corridors?
First of all, our small businesses are about 60% immigrant owned. The issue that we've had with these federal programs and state programs that have helped small businesses is that they weren't prepared to accept the grant and the loan. What did I mean by that? Many of these businesses, they don't have the proper paperwork. They don't have the proper accounting principles. They don't have the proper tax records. They don't have sufficient to establish either the federal government or the state government to provide them with low interest loans or grants. The funds are there, the grants are there. How do you access it? Well, as part of the legislation that we passed in the Senate, we're going to allocate about $20 million for entrepreneur programs, small business programs that are going to help our small businesses around here to be able to be in a position in terms of record keeping and so forth to access all of that money that's going to be available. In the last couple of weeks, I have met in my district with many businesses. Some of them didn't even know that these programs are available. There was an owner of a Chinese restaurant takeout that was about to close her business. She was suffering, she wasn't paying her rent. We gave her the principles of these loans programs that are available. And today, she was able to get a low interest loan with grants, and she's still there, and she's gonna survive for the next 20, she's been there for 30 years. This is what we need in the Bronx. We have to make sure that we put our small businesses in a position to be able to prosper. And with that, you need to be able to have the record keeping to access all these wonderful loans that are available. So the money is there, but let's help our small businesses get that funding so they can strive, so they can continue to prosper and continue to hire people, because our small businesses are backbone of the economy here in the Bronx.
Our mom and pop shops and merchants and small businesses are the foundation of our community. We have to do more to support them. It's been very painful during COVID-19 to see many businesses close their doors and struggle to survive, to maintain payroll, to maintain their operations, and provide critical services. Our mom and pops need to be strengthened. They need to be given support and resources like technical assistance and access to grant opportunities. We need to make sure we expand on minority and women-owned businesses. And we also need to make sure that we provide incentives. We can offer our small businesses incentives so they can hire locally, they can hire through the Summer Youth Employment Program, and they can really make sure that the local economy is at its very best. Our small businesses are vibrant, and we want to make sure that they strive and thrive. And the city is responsible and has a real priority to do far better than we have done during the pandemic. Less than 10% of our businesses in the Bronx were able to receive any of the PPP loans. Many of them were found ineligible, and we have to get to the root causes of that. As Borough President, I will strengthen the Office of the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, BOEDC, and make sure that we have dedicated staff working with our small businesses to develop small business plans, applications for grants and loans, technical assistance, capital support, because we also know we have to build capital, and we also will work with our worker cooperatives and make sure we can strengthen opportunities at entrepreneurial aspects, as well as making sure that we strengthen our businesses.
So knowing that we have these little hubs and little community corners of numerous businesses, many of them are not organized with either merchant association or bid. So I really want to help create these little pockets of organizational force between the businesses, so they have a joint voice when coming to my office or any other office to make sure that they have the help that they need. I plan to create a small business task force within my office and the Bronx Economic Development Corporation to basically be a constituent service center for small businesses, helping them guide through the paperwork of the grants and loans that are available, working with banks so they can get good bank loans to either start their business, help pick up where they left off, fill in some of the gaps that remain, and really give that voice to our small businesses. Work with public safety to make sure that we know of the concerns that lie and how to protect our small businesses from any danger. But really also just opening the doors up so they can rehire those that they had to let go during the pandemic and help the small business economy regenerate.
What I'm gonna do is try to get together lenders and tell them how important it is to come and spend money in the Bronx. One of the things that I'm gonna advocate for is, give people access to capital. If you walk down 3rd Avenue, if you walk down Burnside, you walk down 149th Street, there's a whole bunch of storefronts that are closed. And people want to invest. Right now, after the pandemic, what we see is that some people are not going to come back to New York and invest unless there's that opportunity. So giving the BOCD the chance to give out grants and small, low interest loans, because that's the key, low interest loan to people that are willing to invest long term is the route that we need to go in order to get our businesses going. The Bronx is one of the few boroughs, as a matter of fact, this is the only borough that depends on small businesses to boost its economy. Each small business employs up to 10 people that directly are affected by small businesses. So that's one of the things that I wanna do, is give small people access to capital so they can open up stores.
The new research that Tom DiNapoli just came out with, the state controller, that the Bronx was the hardest hit economically right here in the Bronx. And what we need is we need to energize the Bronx overall economic development. With $30 million sitting there, often those funds do not come right here to the Bronx. And for people who want to do business in the Bronx, who live in the Bronx, my vision is to see people who live in the Bronx be able to get these funds, open up business, create jobs, and then for money to exchange hands, at least 7 hands in our communities. Why? That's how prosperity grows, and that's how wealth comes to our community. And I think it's the moment that we begin to energize our business community, we're going to have tremendous success. The second thing we need to do in the city, we need to remove all of this regulation. People will be shocked to know that there's at least 5,000 regulations when it comes to small businesses. And the fines that they're getting is just, sometimes they are ridiculous. It's just no way for a business to be able to operate, especially under the conditions that we are experiencing right now. So the other thing that we need to do is to connect with SBS, and especially when it comes to WMBEs, certify people for WMBEs so they can get contracts with the city and to get loans, low interest loans from SBS. The Bronx only received 1% of all the loans that were given during the pandemic, and yet we were hit the hardest. There's a disparity, there's a gap that we need to fill.
Our next question is on culture and the arts. The Bronx's arts and culture landscape is made up of many smaller organizations and community-led groups. It also employs many individual artists like musicians, dancers, poets, and actors who have lost their jobs in the gig economy during the pandemic. How would you advocate to get the arts sector back on its feet?
Well, again, as part of our small business program, we also added funding for arts, for theater and the arts. There's about $80 million that are available to this subgroup. Look, the arts are incredibly important, not only for adults, but more particularly for children. If you see kids that are exposed to cultural arts differences, you see how they become better students. Things like music, right? Many of our public schools don't have music programs anymore, and if they do, children have to share the instruments. But what does music do, for example? Kids that take music, they do better in math, they do better in science. You know, with music you learn half note, quarter note, so that helps you with fractions. Kids that have these arts, kids that take painting history, you learn about these things and you see how our children prosper and do a much better job academically. So it is vital that we do not only helping those art centers that are available now, but the goal should be for our kids to be able to access them in the future and become better, well-rounded, culturally well-rounded individuals, and nothing but good things come of that.
As Bronx Borough President, I will work with the new administration on providing more incentives and opportunities for our gig workers, more worker protection and raising the labor standards for our gig workers, making sure that they have improved working conditions and that they also have fringe benefits that we know many of them did not have access to because many of them were laid off. We have incredible organizations in the Bronx. I represent the Bronx Museum of the Arts, which is a SIG organization along with the Bronx Museum, the Zoo, the Botanical Gardens, Wave Hill, and many others. But I also recognize Ghetto Film School, Mind Builders, Pregones Theater, BAD, the Bronx Arts Ensemble. There are so many great organizations that provide arts and education and culture. There is an intersection between arts, education, and culture. We have to recognize that. We have to recognize the role of jobs and strengthening the local economy, but also the education with our school-based providers and our educators. leaders. And as Borough President, we will work to incentivize the arena, provide more support, raising the labor standards so that they have more opportunities, and also looking at more partnerships with CUNY, with our high school consortium, so that we are training up the next artists and curators. They're already there in the Bronx, and we just have to give them access and opportunity.
Loudly. I would advocate very loudly. The arts is something so precious of the Bronx and from the Bronx. You know, we've been those that have started a lot of the pop culture items that, you know, we continue to celebrate today. Hip hop, doo-wop, salsa, everything. So as Borough President, I want to bring everybody to the table. I want to help host events so all of our gig workers and our artists and musicians have a place to perform. Working with CBOs, letting them know and maybe giving assistance into organizing events there so there's opportunity for the talent to be seen. It's really important that we show the best of the Bronx at any place at any time that we can. So whether it's food festivals, any events that, you know, the Borough President might hold, any other elected official might hold it, we need to create these opportunities to have a moment for the arts in every space. So I will be that loud advocate. I welcome them to participate in every one of my events, whether it's incorporated within it in the beginning or a show at the end. It's just so important that we celebrate our talents and that we see the talent that is brewing right here in our borough.
One of the things that I actually was thinking about when I was visiting what we call the monument, the Peace Monument. It's an proclaimed little park over in McCombs. Is like, why don't we now start our own little small festivals in each section of the Bronx in order to get our artists going, and it should be promoted by the Bronx Borough President's Office. We have a whole bunch of different ethnic groups here in the Bronx, so each ethnic group grab a park and let's promote and let's give them the help, let's give them the money. I know a lot of the artists, we got to keep our artists here in the Bronx. You know, we have so many ethnic groups that, you know, are so diverse that I think it's very important that the Bronx Borough President's Office gets involved. So one of the initiatives that I want to start is start an arts a program in each different sector, whether it's Garifuna, whether it's Dominican, whether it's Puerto Rican, and I think that would go a long way of helping. The pandemic has left us shot pretty much, so that's one of the things, one of the initiatives that I want to start.
Well, I'd like to see the Bronx become the mecca of the arts and culture. One of the things that I'm looking forward to open up here in the Bronx, and I've been working actually for 2 years with the Puerto Rican Institute, is to have the first salsa museum right here in the Bronx. I want to be able to attract tourism. We're going to have the hip hop museum, and this year I allocated funds towards the hip hop museum. And so you can imagine, right? Buses coming from the city, tourists going to the hip hop museum, going to the salsa museum. We cannot forget the merengue museum. So we could become a destination place for, and not just for outside, for our people to be able to enjoy themselves. The other thing is I want to engage the private sector. We have large corporations that come here in the Bronx, and they're not giving as much as they should, and they should give towards the arts. It makes our community richer, it makes our community more cohesive whenever we have the arts growing, and we need to enhance what they do because they are a positive force, especially when it comes to young people.
City contracts don't always receive the attention they deserve and are often not paid on time. As Borough President, how would you make sure city contracts are paid on time so that nonprofit and cultural organizations can be paid in a timely manner?
The issue that we have is certainly that many of us, for example, me as a state senator and during this, when I was a state assembly person, is that I would allocate funding for many city projects in my district. And I can tell you, for example, something like cameras for the police department. I allocated cameras 7 years ago, and I'm still waiting for them to be placed. The borough president's power is limited, as we all know. We are primarily persons that are ambassadors to this county. And as an ambassador, you have to have relationships with all powers of government, all levels of government, to get things accomplished. So if you have funding, you have to be able to have a working relationship with the mayor. You have to be able to have a working relationship with the governor. And that's something that I've been able to develop throughout my 10 years in government and my 30 years in public service. So I can call, let's say, for example, you have to have a relationship with the mayor and say, Mr. Mayor, I need, or Miss Mayor, or Mrs. Mayor, we need funding for this program. Is there anything you can do to expedite the funding? Because you're right, A lot of the funding that we allocate as state and local officials goes to the graveyard, and they don't get them until several years later. And it's shameful because the need is immediate. So you have to be able, as that ambassador, to be able to reach out to all levels of government and say, I have this problem, the money's there, please get it to us immediately.
This is a big problem that the City Council has recognized for the last several years. We've been working with the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, to provide a way to oversee the system of contracts, working with organizations like Human Services Council, which oversees all of our non-for-profits, because there is a serious delay when it comes to contracts. Many agencies are not getting the funding and the approval from OMB, which in turn would allow them to pay out contracts. The city has a contractual obligation. When you enter into a contract with a non-for-profit, you are supposed to pay them on time as they provide the services. Our non-for-profits are providing the service. They're doing that, but many of them are struggling to meet payroll because the city is so delayed. We're not even paying out within one fiscal year. We're still behind. That is a problem. So what do we need to do? We need to work with OMB and work with the administration on how we can expedite the process, provide more efficiency and accountability for the non-for-profits. They're doing their part, and now we have to do ours. And as Bronx Borough President, since I know the process, I know how the city budget works, I know how the discretionary budget process works, capital, I know this process, and I will be able to be a strong voice for our Bronx non-for-profits to make sure that they not only receive their contractual money, but we also need to make sure that they are working with agencies on how we can tailor some of the work they're doing so that we can expand. Because many contracts are renewed over a 3 to 5 year period, and we know that as the city looks to expand services, we know that sometimes the smaller CBOs cannot compete. They do not get these contracts when they apply for RFPs, so we as a borough need to provide support, like the Center for Non-for-Profits at Hostos Community College. We should work with them and other entities on how we can help non-for-profits so that everyone can apply and become eligible for the RFP process.
Well, it's important to be on a schedule. I'm one that's very much about my schedule. We have a due date, we have a start date, we have a check-in date to see where we are in the process. And I'm persistent. I will ask a question every day. I will call you every day to see where we are in the process and when can I expect payment for the contracts that we signed. And as the saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, so I plan to squeak as loud as I can to make sure that, you know, my partners here in the borough are getting their due diligence and paid on time. But it's important to be on top of them, persistent, making sure that we have a clear schedule that remains on schedule, and that we see people getting the benefits of their talent.
I like to partner up with a city councilman so we can actually implement, let's codify the law that mandates us to do a review and have the city contracts paid on time. You know, I think codifying it would be one of the reasons we would solve that problem. It's like the budget. You know, we got to have a budget before we start spending. So same thing with city contracts. Let's put it into law.
You know, that is such an important question. I've seen that over and over where nonprofits are not paying until a year later. So now they have to find themselves getting a bridge loan, and they're not compensated for all the interest, for all the hassle, for all the work in getting those loans. So as the borough president, I'm going to be the voice for the Bronx, the representatives. It's an executive position that I'm going to be able to work with the new mayor of the city of New York to be able to rectify the problem that we have. It's not fair. There's really no justification other than the city holding the money back so they could gain interest at the expense of our people and our organization. So I'm going to be a loud voice to making sure that we change the system, the structure that is right now is dysfunctional.
On land use and planning, last year City Council Speaker Corey Johnson unveiled a comprehensive plan for land use. It called for creating a holistic planning framework that would prevent the city from making haphazard rezoning and land use decisions that harm communities of color. Borough presidents play an important role within the Uniform Land Use Review Process, or ULURP, which requires that most big land use proposals like rezonings be reviewed by elected officials and the public. If elected, what would you propose to make land use planning more equitable?
One of the things that I'm proposing that seems to scare other people, other elected officials, is to democratize the ULURP process, at least locally. For example, you give the community boards a bigger say in developments that they want in their communities. Right now, the borough president, we have one appointment on the board, and it's really an advisory capacity more than anything else. It's the city council person that they usually give deference to when it comes to ULURP development projects. The ultimate decision should never rest with one person. A city council person may have a different perspective on a development than the rest of the community. So I say, give the power to the community. Give real democratic power to the community board so they have more of a say in the ULURP process. Also, working with the person that has the most number of members on the committee, and that's the mayor. Right? You have to have a working relationship with the mayor so that you are able to say, Mr. Mayor, I think the development they're proposing is problematic. And so please, we're asking you to vote down a particular project if it's not going to work well with the county. So you have to use the ULURP process to make sure you have the right development, but also use it to make it an economic arm for the community. Another thing that I propose is that any real estate developer that has any application for land use in the ULURP process, that the borough president should never, or the city council persons should never accept a political contribution from that real estate developer. You know, you have to have a level of fairness and transparency to make sure that developers are not getting what they want because they're influencing the political process. You have to make it much more democratic.
I've had this conversation many, many times. I believe the land use ULURP process must be reformed. We should expand the time period by which the community board is able to comment, and we need to give them real power and not just an advisory position. We need to expand our base. It should not just be community boards, but it should be other stakeholders, because I don't want to assume that the local community board reflects every single opinion in that particular community board. There are other stakeholders that are not members of the community board that also should have a role. As borough president, I will convene a working group of all of our labor and trade unions and work with them and meet with them on a monthly basis about all the projects that are coming down the pipeline, because once the ULURP process starts, it's on a time frame. We should expand the public comment period. We should expand the time frame by which the borough president has to make their recommendation before it goes to city planning and then goes to the city council. I've been a part of a lot of ULURP land use processes over my time in the council, so I see the areas of growth and I see the mistakes that have been made over the years. We need to make sure that communities are really engaged. We need to make sure that we advocate and we mandate local hiring, MWBE provisions, apprenticeship opportunities. We need to look at project labor agreements and community benefits agreements so that there are guaranteed jobs and wage standards that we are asking for, which is the floor and not the ceiling. We need to make sure we have commercial and retail diversity. We need to look at ULURP and land use as a neighborhood plan. So as we build housing, we need to look at schools, parks, playgrounds, libraries, cultural institutions, open space. We need to make sure that we take care of neighborhoods, because all of the units of housing we're building are for families with children. Those children will go to our schools. Those families will shop in our neighborhoods. So that's why we have to look at ULURP as a neighborhood plan. We have to engage people in a real transformative way in an open process, and we have to provide the accountability that is necessary and make sure that as we move forward, that ULURP and land use is really a process that engages everyone, no matter where you come from and no matter where you live in the Bronx.
I would propose that we must have more than one community town hall. One with the community board and one not with the community board, because unfortunately our community boards, as great as they are, and you know, we appreciate every member that's there giving their time and energy on a volunteer basis for such projects, still there's always a gap in how far this knowledge is going. So I want to go further into our community. So outside of just the community board, going to the community organizations, going to tenant associations, neighborhood associations, and really informing them of what is the plan to come and making sure they give their input, literally asking, demanding for their input. But I propose a community impact study as well, because it is important that we understand what is the intention of the project and what might be an unintended consequence of the project. The last thing we ever want to see is a community hurt by a new addition that we're bringing here. So we really got to be careful, study hard, and make sure that we inform as many community members of what is going on so they can be a part of it, because this is their community we're improving, and the last thing we need to do is create something that will displace them.
That's a great question, and a perfect example is the building of a jail in Mott Haven. You know, the citizens, the elected officials, the majority of the elected officials in the Bronx, even Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz, who's I think has done a great job, we're opposed to it. In the meantime, we're still going to build a jail here in Mott Haven. I think that process needs to be halted. I think that we have to give the elected officials, the local elected officials, and the community boards a bigger say on these things. And as Bronx Borough President, I'm going to scream from the top of the hills in order to halt this process. You know, I'm not too crazy about the ULIP. It's supposed to be equitable, but it's not. So that's one of the things that I'm going to start advocating, because that's the one thing that the Bronx Borough President's office has, is the land use, and it's not binding. So we got to try to make it a little more binding in that sense.
Well, I think one of the key steps that we need to take, and especially in that piece of legislation, is to be able to empower community boards more. Right now, community boards feel like they're just rubber stamping, and that ought not to be. They are the most impacted, and the borough president gets to select who goes into the community board. So one of the things I want to make sure that the community boards reflect the people living in the community at all levels. This way they could be a true voice, and at the same time have a process in which they have more power. I will also use the power of the as Bronx Borough President, I even allow to call upon a hearing for an entire month if I choose to do so. Borough President Adams did that once, and so I will use the full power to making sure that when we do rezoning, we make sure that the consideration of the people who live in the district, how they're going to be impacted, and the overall impact that it has in the Bronx is taken with strong consideration. So we need a robust system that at the end of the day is fair and equitable.
What is your plan to ensure that our teens and young adults are adequately educated for good careers in the new economy, not just the low-paying service industry jobs many right now have?
That is a question that's near and dear to me. In order to improve the educational scores, we have to also eradicate poverty in this county. I mean, it's just, you know, we spend more money per pupil than any other state in the country, and yet our kids are graduating at a 65% rate. That's completely unforgivable. That education gap continues to grow. So I'm going to invest as many resources as possible to close that education gap so that our kids in the Bronx are also graduating at 85-90% rate. I'm also bringing corporations in my deliberations and trips across the outside of this country. I meet with business leaders, and the number 2 person of Toshiba has promised me that if I can help create a STEM program here in the Bronx, that they will fund it. So imagine Toshiba paying for our kids to get involved in STEM programs. They're going to learn technology and get the kind of jobs. They're going to pay high-paying jobs in the future. And I hope that we have the housing available to them so they can come back and live here and expand our communities.
Number one, I think the city should expand more on CTE programs. We need to get back to our vocation schools where we had young people that developed trades, where we encourage them to become laborers, carpenters, engineers, architects, painters, plumbers. All of these careers are oriented around what we believe young people should aspire to be. We know that everyone doesn't have the track of college, but we need to develop careers. CTE programs can absolutely do that. Schools like Alfred E. Smith, we need to return to that. But we also need to develop apprenticeship opportunities for young people, working with unions, better recruitment at the high school level, working with our colleges, all of the CUNYs, BCC, Hostos and Lehman, MCNY, College of New Rochelle, and Mercy College. We need to develop partnerships so that young people can become interns and can actually have a real pathway to getting into these trades. We need to make sure that we look at summer youth and all year round youth employment, which the City Council has supported for years. We need to expand on that so that we cover more young people. We need to build safe spaces for young people, young adults. We need to make sure they have jobs, they have after school, they have Compass, Sonic, Beacon, Cornerstone programs. We need to build more community centers as we're building all this housing, because we need young people to have places to recreate. But we also need to allow them a space. Art, poetry, spoken word. We need to develop programs like the South Bronx Neon program that we have with the Department of Probation, where young people are artists, they're actors and actresses. We need to allow our young people to express themselves, and we need to give them the access and opportunity to do that. When I think about youth development, I think about investing in the future. Young people are destined for success. All they need is access and opportunity. Every young person is gifted and talented. Our public schools, every school should be a community school. We should have a full-time nurse, social worker, guidance counselor in every single school. We should have universal after school. We should have universal free lunch and free breakfast. We need safe spaces and scratch kitchens. We need to make sure that we are investing in young people, because when you invest in young people, you invest in their future.
Well, we need to give them the opportunity to test their skills and see what they're interested in. I feel like, you know, especially in the arts in schools, music and dance and art, a student may not know their talent unless they're given the opportunity to test it. So we have to make sure our schools are equipped with those programs, the core programs, but also making sure that we have after-school programs that allow them to see what else is going on, what else is out there, and work with partners in the borough, private to public, to give that opportunity to our young people to literally step in the door and work with them. I'm a big supporter of internships and giving a student that real-life work experience before they have to start their real-life work experience. So I want my borough president's office to be that the bridge, the bridge for students and young people to get a taste of what they're interested in, to see if this is what they really can do, or maybe if it's not what they want to do. But giving that step in the door, making sure that students have an opportunity to shadow, to intern, to work is really, really important. And we need to make sure that we have the foundation in our education system to allow them to learn, but also out of school. We need workforce development. We need training here. We need to bring in partners that can show what the rest of the economy is looking for, so they can have proper education and entry into that economy.
That's a great question, and that's actually at the top, at the very top. A lot of people think it's public safety, but it's actually education. So one of my proposals is going to be something called work zones. Work zones work like this. You know, in close to NYCHA buildings and areas that we deemed are at risk, I want to propose these work zones where we teach our kids trade, whether it's making solar panels work, whether it's fixing electric cars. That's the economy of the future. That's where we're going. So what I'm saying is, kids 12 to 17 years old, let's employ them, let's teach them, and at the same time, let's pay them for learning the economy of the future. It serves two purposes. Perhaps they don't have to take on in the streets or join a gang, and at the same time they're getting paid in order to learn a trade. So that's one of the things that I intend to do as Bronx Borough President. I want to go identify the areas that are at risk and then try to see if I can implement these work zones. I call them work zones. We're still in the process of rolling it out, but that's going to be one of my ideas going forward if I get elected.
One of the things I want to do is to be able to create articulation between high schools and colleges. Right now, there are none here in the Bronx. We have it between colleges and businesses. We have it with corporations. For example, I believe that we have the best mechanic training in all of the state of New York at Bronx Community College, which actually is in my district. When those students graduate, they have an articulation, an agreement with BMW, Cadillac. There's not one student that does not end up with a good union-paying job. And so I want to make sure that we do the same thing with high school, so they could get that level of experience and exposure. Because a lot of kids what they don't know, whatever people are not up on, what young people are not up on, they're down on. And this way they could have that level of experience. I want to be able to do the same thing with SUNY Maritime that's right here in the Bronx. The average student that graduates from SUNY Maritime makes $80,000 a year. That's a great way to start. I wish I would have started with $80,000 a year. But unless we do that, young people are not going to see the end game. And so the other piece is apprenticeships, that with corporations that we have here in the Bronx and others that are going to be coming here, so they could have the level of exposure again, internships for our young people to be able to as well have a fast track. And the last thing here is education. Unless we truly prepare our children, at the end of the day, I always say this, education is the key it's like keys. The keys open doors, and the doors are opportunity. And so this is why I brought $175 million into my district. I worked in a public school. The only candidate that has ever worked in a public school running as a Bronx Borough President. And I understand, I get what's missing, the gaps that we find in our school. This is why our students, we have orchestra, kids are playing violin, viola, cello. We have technology, STEMs, programs that they didn't have previously. And so I want to further prepare our students.
On opioid use and treatment, local advocacy groups say that better access to alternative and holistic treatments is essential to combat the opioid epidemic and improve the lives of persons struggling with opioid use disorders. On the other hand, many Bronxites complain that centering treatment facilities and related services in just a few neighborhoods causes individuals with drug dependencies to cluster in those areas, negatively impacting the quality of life. How do you plan to address these conflicting views on how to handle this public health crisis in a humane manner?
It is a public health crisis. It is something that every community in the Bronx seems to be grappling with. But let's be honest about what drug addiction is. It is a health crisis, and we have to treat it as a health crisis. So what we want to do is provide services in places like hospitals, right? Hospitals are some of the best programs in terms of drug treatment. We have to be able to make sure that we spread out access to these treatment programs, not concentrate them in one area, but spread them out throughout the entire county where the need is at. When you have drug treatment centers, usually they're centered around areas where you need the treatment. So if you have a particular area that has a higher level of addiction, then it makes sense to have treatment centers in those areas so that people don't have to travel far and can go into the neighborhood where they live in and get the treatment that they need. But essentially, we have to be able to spread it out throughout all the communities. Because if you don't, then you're right, there's a cluster of people that may need a drug treatment in a particular area, and we want to make sure that no one particular area gets saturated. We want to make sure that every area in the Bronx shares in the treatment process for all of our residents.
The opioid crisis is an alarming one that has had a disproportionate impact on people of color and many marginalized New Yorkers. When the opioid outbreak first hit the city of New York and we saw the high rates of drug misuse and overuse in the Bronx and Staten Island, we started working groups where we're working with organizations like St. Anne's Harm Reduction and Montefiore and Bronx Care and H&H and all the other institutions, and it's really centered in the South Bronx. We're talking about a safe injection site that would be located in a part of the South Bronx, which is a conversation we'll still continue to have. I think we have to engage the medical professionals, FQHCs, school-based health centers, and all of our partners, faith, clergy leaders, community-based organizations, and we have to keep talking about services. We cannot turn our noses up at residents that need our help. They look like us and all they need is assistance. We have many people that are traumatized by COVID, that are living with an addiction, living with a mental illness or a psychiatric diagnosis, and they're not getting help. As we talk about building affordable housing, it has to be supportive housing. So you have social services, you have psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers and clinicians on site to help many of these men and women through their struggle so that they can be on the road to recovery, right? When you talk to people about some of the challenges they face, they are rent burdened, they are underemployed, they're uninsured, they have no insurance, they don't have a primary care doctor, they don't have access to mental health. That's all related. So when you talk about the opioid crisis, yes, we can talk about a safe injection site. Yes, we can talk about putting needle exchange and syringe programs in our open spaces like parks, but we have to deal with the root causes of the issue. And if we don't deal with that, we'll continue to have an issue that is further exacerbated in this pandemic world. So what I will do as BP, work with the task force, work with the medical professionals, get resources and programs through the discretionary budgeting process, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and work with all of our providers. Everyone has to play a role, but it's about balance in the system and it's about equity, because this is not a South Bronx issue. This is not a minority issue. This is a people and a human rights issue that has affected everyone in the Bronx.
Well, addiction is a disease and we must treat it as that. So as we have clinics in every neighborhood, we need to have these services within our current clinics and our current health-based organizations. And for those that need more help, instead of past education and past awareness, we need to have access and ability to get to these locations. So transportation is something that we need to look at, because too many times I've heard people say, I have an appointment and it's 2 miles away, but it takes me an hour to get there. That's because our transportation system is not as efficient as it should be. We need to streamline our access to these locations. But we must have the conversation. We have to talk about it. It may be uncomfortable, it may start, arguments, but it's something that is very real and must be addressed in a very real way. People need help and we have to provide the help. And people need to feel okay about speaking up about the help that they need. There's still a stigma that's really, really sad to see sometimes. It's happened in my neighborhood. I've seen it happen all over the borough, where a proposed location is here and all of a sudden there's hate for what might come. but there's people in our communities that are probably hiding, that are probably, you know, keeping it secret of what they're going through. And we need to let it be known that you are welcome in your concerns, and you have somewhere to go nearby that can help you get out of the disease that you're suffering.
Yes, and let me tell you, I don't think there's anybody running for Bronx Borough President that has dealt with this situation head on like I have. I've seen so many people die of opioid use that it's really sad. It's really sad. One thing that I'm not going to advocate is opening up more centers in residential areas. You know, I know that there's a big concern. I know that the word equitable and putting these centers in residential areas, people that have invested their life savings into buying a home, and now next thing somebody puts a center there. But we have to obviously tackle this. It's got to be both working hand in hand with our federal partners and making sure that the Bronx gets it's equitable in the sense that the Bronx doesn't get the bulk of the centers and the bulk of the people that need help. You know, what we're seeing right now is that most of these folks are being sent to the Bronx, and they want to build more institutions here in the Bronx as opposed to Manhattan, Brooklyn. I want to make sure that everybody gets their fair share in treating this. And obviously enforcement and trying to minimize some of the drug trade is going to be a factor here. You know, we want to make sure that, you know, this thing is not being. We want to minimize the drug dealers. Let's see if the locations that are here now are working appropriately. I know that there's a lot of money being spent in a lot of these clinics, and I want to make sure that they're using the money wisely and treating our folks.
I'm the only candidate that ever worked in a public school as a substance abuse specialist, and the only candidate that was actually a director of a rehab program. So I bring a lot of experience regarding this. Those two issues that you just brought, it doesn't have to be an either-or situation. I agree. We need to do a better job. Let me keep it real. There are people here in the city who are facing a level of addiction, which is going to require not only to go to a program outside of the Bronx, perhaps outside of the state, because the temptation is ever present. We have a saying, it's not that they know where the drugs are at, the drugs know where they are at. And so we have to do a better job in making sure that our certain communities, I look at 149th Street and 3rd Avenue, they're overburdened with methadone programs. We have to do a better job in locating these programs, and also to having programs that are effective and efficient, and they have a good track record of getting people off the life of drugs. And at the same time, we need to look at all the options that we have. Treatment. And what I want to have, and I've been fighting for from the very beginning, is treatment on demand. When somebody wants to get off of drugs, they don't want to hear, I need to go to a residential program, come next week, we'll get you a bed. It should be immediately, they should be connected to a residential treatment center, so they could live a drug-free life.
Our next is a rapid-fire question. Name 2 communities throughout the borough that you will commit to walk through with local groups and residents in your first 30 days in office to draw attention to their complaints about quality of life issues.
If it's 2 communities that I represent, obviously is a good segment of the South Bronx and parts of Morrisania area. These are areas where, for example, you have NYCHA developments that are falling apart. These are areas where I've allocated millions of dollars now to get simple things like the entrance to the door with intercom systems. When you see the lead-based issues in these developments, you see seniors that are suffering. You see areas where children are the poorest children in the entire state of New York, and I dare say in the United States, and our seniors are the second poorest in the entire country. I want you to see that. I want you to visit that and tell me how you feel.
Well, I'm going to say a section. The South Bronx and the Northeast Bronx. Is that okay? That's tough. Then they'll say, you didn't say my neighborhood, Miss Gibson.
Sorry, because there's a lot of communities. The Southern Belmont community, I would like to see. I don't think they have a merchant association outside of the one from Arthur Avenue. So I really would like to see what is going on in these little business hubs. As well as, let me think. Williamsbridge and Baychester area. Baychester, actually, that's a very recent conversation I had. Baychester, for a long time, according to the residents and many people there, they feel that they've been neglected. And a lot of the leadership and presence by their elected officials. So it doesn't matter that they're on the outskirts of the borough and you know, right there at the borough, at the border of Westchester County. We really got to walk the edges and walk down the middle to make sure that we're really addressing and seeing what is going on in every community and helping them get the resources that they need.
Okay, so I can tell you, yesterday I walked the entire Tremont Avenue, from river to river. I'm the only candidate to have done so, and as you know, that's a 7-mile stretch. I started in the Marina del Rey and ended up in Sedgwick Avenue. I'll tell you, I'm pretty tired. So I can tell you I walked more than 2 sections, and I'm gonna walk next week. I'm gonna walk the whole Grand Congress from 138th Street all the way up to Van Cortlandt, I believe that's where it ends. So, but I can tell you, probably, if I have to name 2 sections, it's gonna be University Heights and my own area of Morris Park.
Oh, that's a big question, and the problem with that question is, right, people are gonna say, how can you didn't mention my neighborhood? But look, I think the 149th Street, 3rd Avenue bit there, there's a great need there, and we have to address the issues that we just mentioned: the drug addiction problem, the crime that is definitely taking place. The other community, which I was just there yesterday, is the North Bronx. They feel forgotten, and I want to be present. Crime is beginning to rise, drug addiction is beginning to rise, quality of life issues are beginning to go down. So I want to make sure that we cover all the bases here in the Bronx. I want to be a uniter. I want to be a Bronx Borough president for all.
On housing and homelessness, what policies do you plan to lobby for at the city level to secure housing subsidies to reduce homelessness in our borough? What role do you see your office playing in creating home ownership?
Well, again, through the Economic Development Corporation, it's the funding arm of the Bronx Borough Presidency. Whatever program that we develop has to have a combination of private equity and government funding. Now, one of the things that we have to do, especially with the homelessness program, now people also have issues with where we have shelters. Shelters are created where the need is at. If you have a highest level of people that have lost their jobs and can no longer pay their rent and need to move into a shelter, it's almost inhumane if they have children, and 31% of those that are homeless every day are children, to send them across another county. Right? So you want to keep the children within the fabric of the communities that they're raising, not make them suffer because mom or dad may have lost their job. So you have to have affordable housing. You have to have housing that it's going to be permanent housing for those that are homeless, and not what we have now where the homeless industry is $1 billion industry. Invest that money so people can get permanent housing. You also have to have a change in what they call the area median income. It's unrealistic for us to expect people in our community, the poorest county in New York State, where less than, I say the largest number of people are making less than $40,000, and 50% of their rent of their salaries go to paying rent. Right? You can't expect people to be able to comply with the area median income that's been established by the federal government. So what I say is create an AMI that is really a circumference of about 15 to 20 blocks in an area, because that'll really tell you where the economy is of that community, where the unemployment rates are, the educational rates are. So you need to change the concept of AMI with affordable housing. With that, I think you can make a considerable and substantive change in terms of housing for people in this community.
Ooh, great question. I am a huge proponent of home ownership opportunities. I'm a big supporter of community land trusts, which build economic wealth and power and economic prosperity in the borough of the Bronx. We cannot look at ourselves as tenants for the rest of our lives and renters. We need to own property so we can build value and we can have a seat at the table. We need to build more 1- and 2-family homes. We need to support homeowners in a real transformative way. We need to support co-op and condo owners with tax incentives and other tax credits. We need to really look at the Section 8 program being revamped. We are now raising the value, thank God, of the City FEPS program, so that you actually, if you are a City FEPS holder, you can actually find an apartment that you can afford. We need to have an AMI structure that is for the Bronx and not the city of New York, because our AMI structure in the Bronx is much lower than the citywide average. We're subjected to that. As we talk about economic development and building new housing, we want to work with all of the developers. We want to build affordable housing. We want supportive housing for veterans and foster youth and LGBTQIA youth and seniors. We want to build housing for our older residents that need that support. But we have to do it in a real transformative way. We have to look at some of the programs like Sarah and Ella that tax incentive and drive the type of development we want to see. We also have to make sure we have set-asides for formerly homeless families. We have a homelessness crisis in New York City. We can't build all affordable housing in low-income communities of color. We have to build it all over the Bronx and the city of New York. This is a city problem, not a Bronx problem.
Well, we need education as to how one becomes a homeowner. Financial literacy is something that we need to start early on. I would love to see my schools incorporate that into their curriculums. And there are programs that, with the cost, we can bring into schools to help teach our children at a younger age how to save, how to invest, how to prepare yourself for a stable future. So that needs to start earlier. When it comes to affordable housing, that is a big role that the borough president can play in making sure that we approve actual affordable housing in our neighborhoods. And I really want to look at the numbers. The AMI everybody talks about, it's not reflective of the Bronx, and that's very true. The AMI is an average of all 5 boroughs, Westchester and Rockland County, and we need to really look at the Bronx in itself. And maybe even like by neighborhood, because neighborhoods do differentiate. But we need to educate people and bring that awareness and opportunity to them where they are. Looking at how we're developing neighborhoods, really protecting neighborhoods, making sure that, it's just not somebody buying land and building whatever they want. We need to have communication with these investors to make sure that they're adding to what we already have in the neighborhood in a positive way that benefits us.
My whole thing as Bronx Borough President is creating home ownership. It's renting to home ownership, a path to that. And often our people are not taught that, you save money and you can buy your own home. I don't want to see people getting subsidies after subsidies, because that kind of keeps people renting for their entire life. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to create, and this is for every other program that I'm planning to roll out as Bronx Borough President, I want to create the Bronx Borough President's Office on Wheels. And I want to, rather than having the people go to 161st Street, go to your office or call looking for help, I want to be able to go and have my office on wheels and park it in areas that are needed. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to have an office that's dedicated to home ownership. I don't demean development. I want more development. But some of that development, I know they put 15% set aside for homelessness. I want it at 25%, because right now, after the pandemic, we all have to do our fair share. 25% is a good number for homelessness. And at the same time, for every developer that comes and makes millions of dollars in the Bronx, I want to start making more condos here. And let's give an opportunity for our people to own condos rather than rent apartments. So I'm gonna emphasize that a lot, to be honest with you, as Bronx Borough President.
We need affordable housing. I brought more affordable housing units into my district than any other candidate in this race. So I know how to do it. I know how to get it done. The borough president has funding, capital funding, that we're going to be able to subsidize for developers to bring true affordable housing to our community. My district is one of the only 7, according to the NYU Furman Center, that has not been experienced any type of gentrification. That didn't happen by chance. That happened because we had a strategy to making sure that we created a firewall through affordable housing unit and not find what we find in other neighborhoods like in Williamsburg and Inwood, where people, in Washington Heights, where people are just literally being moved out. And so in home ownership, that's key. There's nothing like owning your own home. And we got to work with banks. I think that we need more community banks. Community banks are giving extra help through the federal government. They get $30 million to be able to give out. And I think the federal program is a tremendous one, but I don't see the floodgates as open as it should, and we should have an educational program. A lot of people don't believe that they will qualify, and yet they're paying the same rent that they will pay, and sometimes more than they would if they had their own property and have financial literacy programs to better prepare our people to be able to save and invest in their own home.
On the environment, While public officials' commitment to the Bronx River Greenway marks progress at connecting Bronxites to the waterfront, environmental groups continue to fight to create a Harlem River Greenway, a contiguous waterfront park running from the South Bronx to Van Cortlandt Park. But numerous city and state agencies, along with Amtrak and private developers who are building along the waterfront, all have overlapping jurisdiction. How do you see your role in cutting through the red tape created by these competing interests to realize the community visions for their waterfront?
Well, just like the job of the borough president, again, is the ambassador. You have to develop relationships with the people that have the levels of power to be able to develop this greenway. Now, look, I am an avid cyclist. I am an avid environmentalist. My record is 100% every year by all the environmental organizations. I get ranked with 100% favorable rating. I am a person who's a vegan. I love to make sure that we have these greenways throughout the state because it is good policy. It is healthy for the community. One of the things that I'm proposing, because we have to be visionary in this position, is to create what's called a 15-minute city. It's nothing new. They're doing it in Paris. They're doing it in Melbourne, where people live within a 15-minute radius and get resources and jobs within a 15-minute radius of where they live. You know, we grew up with the concept of building roads to get us from here to there faster, instead of creating infrastructure where people can stay within their communities. Now, what does that do? The 15-minute city stresses the importance of pedestrian traffic, bike traffic, and mass transportation of alternatives. To build this infrastructure is a lot cheaper than build roads the way we do. To build this infrastructure is a lot more efficient. And guess what? Not only do you cure these problems, but you also cure the issue of environmental racism. When you have a 15-minute city, undoubtedly you're going to lower carcinogens because you're going to rely more on people power and less on factors that create and release more carcinogens into the environment. You know, we have the Cross Bronx Expressway that is an economic and environmental nightmare for the Bronx, and Robert Moses built it. That's why our kids all have asthma. I mean, there are other factors, but the Cross Bronx Expressway is a terrible pollutant. So we have to make sure that we create a green tech, green city within my 15-minute city.
I know about that red tape. I'm a resident of Morris Heights and I live near the Harlem River waterfront. So I've been working with organizations like Urban Divers, New York Restoration Project. I represent Roberto Clemente State Park, the only state park in the Bronx, which is along the Harlem River waterfront. We need to make sure that we work with all stakeholders, city DOT, state DOT, DEP, the federal government. I mean, there's so much. I also represent the High Bridge, the oldest standing walking bridge in the city of New York that opened a few years ago under the Bloomberg administration that connects High Bridge to Washington Heights. So we need to make sure that, number one, we have more access to the waterfront. We need to make sure we open up our waterways. I would love to see our produce and other items that we receive in supermarkets delivered by waterway. I would love to see ferry service along the Harlem River, right? We have the Metro North there today. We have the Harlem River step streets that we're renovating now in conjunction with Borough President Diaz. We have Bridge Park that sits along the Harlem River. We need to expand that and make sure we have more pedestrian access as well as bicycle access as well. More dedicated bike lanes so that you can get over to the Harlem River because it's very isolated. I know about the Fordham Landing project that you're talking about, and I know that there's conversations around that, but at the end of the day, I think we need to bring all parties together and formulate a working group and then start to involve the public, Community Board 5 and the residents of River Park Towers, Tracy Towers, and all along the west side, and make sure that we involve everybody. At the end of the day, we want to achieve a balance in this work. We want to open up our waterways and access the waterfront, potentially development and affordable housing, but we also want to expand the park with pedestrian safety measures as well as bicycle access for cyclists as well.
Bringing everybody to the table. We have to hear each other out. I know the communities have their wants and concerns, and they're very much in their right to have that. We should be utilizing all of our green space and our waterway space. This gives opportunity to different elements of education, you know, safety measures even, learning how to swim, learning how to tie a boat. Things like that is something that every person should know and experience. And those that have ownership of the land and the developers around, they need to know that this is something that the community wants. I think I mentioned it in my last answer, but we can't allow anybody to just build and do what they want without understanding the impact of the direct community. So having everyone at the table, community activists, environmental activists, as well as those with ownership of the land and our elected officials that can help, you know, bridge these gaps. The borough president is supposed to, make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I will get us in one room, get us at the same table, and we will have a direct conversation about what we want, what we can do, and what we can make happen.
Yeah, by the way, I'm all for the waterway, but use the power of the pulpit. That's pretty much what a Bronx Borough President's office can do. Use the power of the pulpit, bring the people in, that's what I've been accustomed to, bringing people in and expressing how important this is for the people, and I'm hoping that I will be able to get that done.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I want to be the man in the middle. I want to be able to work with those developers, to work with the city and the community. The community, at the end of the day, these projects are done really for the community. So it baffles me sometimes that the community's input is not taken into consideration, and for that matter, strong consideration, because if we say we're doing it for them, then we need to do it literally. It has to be functionally for them, and there's nothing like the environment to affect a community. And we've seen how it has negatively impacted the Bronx when those considerations were not taken into place. We got the Cross Bronx that was put right straight smack through the middle of the Bronx, and to this day we're still feeling the effects of that. And so we cannot continue to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Our next question is on community planning. How would you bring value to the sweat equity that has taken place over the years in communities across the Bronx and protect the community visioning process to honor the solutions that your constituents have already made over decades?
Oh, that's critically important. People who invested their blood, sweat, and tears in this community should have the right to be able to remain in this community. Displacement is something that I'm concerned about. The Bronx is really the last bastion of real estate development that is still somewhat affordable. We want to make sure that the people who invested their lives here are able to remain in this community. So I would be an extremely loud cheerleader to make sure that people are able to remain here, that are not displaced, and that any monies that I have, primarily the 5% capital funding that I get, would be to make sure that people are able to remain here as much as possible.
Community visions and community voices are very important to me. When I did the Jerome rezoning in 2017, it was a very big challenge because you had a community in need, a community that was very scared about displacement, dealing with landlord harassment, and we wanted to see new housing, but we wanted it to be housing for the local community. So in my work as borough president, I will work with all of our organizers like Banana Kelly, like Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, Casa Bronx, and so many other organizations, tenants and neighbors, that I've been working with over the years, and talk to them about what the community vision plan will be. The residents of our community must have a voice. We must engage young people in the process, youth advocates. We have to talk to our elders, our seniors, right, that have been a part of this process for a very long time. We have to have working groups as borough president that will talk about what the needs are of that particular community, because we don't want people's voices to be drowned out. We know development is scary for people. Some people don't want to embrace change because they don't think it's change for them. But we want to find a very delicate balance in this work. The working group, working with community boards, the tenant leaders, tenant advisors, the advocates, and everyone else to make sure we come up with the very best plan. And as borough president, I will engage all of our stakeholders and make sure that they have a seat at the table.
Very simple. I won't budge unless I see what the community wants is what we're going to get.
The most important thing is keep the citizens safe. And the reason why I say that in answering your question is I am one of those that took advantage of our community and what they did. I bought a house, I put my entire life savings and bought a home. And what I want to make sure is that we don't start making choices that are gonna hurt our constituents and our people. As far as whether you put a homeless shelter in a residential area, and lastly, we have to make sure that we listen to our community boards. The community boards, they have the pulse of the community, and that's one thing that I intend to do as Bronx Borough President.
Promises made to communities should be honored. I have a huge problem when commitments are made by the city and they're not fulfilled. This is why when I did the rezoning and Jerome rezoning, we make sure that actually all those commitments are online and they have deadlines. And that way we can make sure that the commitments that are made are fulfilled. And I think when elected officials give their word, when the city gives, especially the administration, give the word, we should hold them accountable.
Our next question is about protecting parkland. In recent years, we have seen the jurisdiction of parkland switched for the benefit of housing. For example, Pier 5 that was changed from Parks jurisdiction to city control, and a portion of Corporal Fisher Park was converted to housing. If elected, what will you do to ensure that Bronx parkland is protected and not converted for other uses?
Well, remember that the jurisdiction and the authority that I have over that is really limited to what the federal government or the state government or the city municipality allows me to do. However, again, as an ambassador, as someone who is a staunch environmentalist, to me, protecting parklands is critical as part of the development of any county. You have to have that. And again, as part of my 15-minute city, it would be a critical component of it. You know, we need development, obviously. We need to provide affordable housing, but we have other options. And so the use of parkland should only be as a last resort, and I don't think we've reached that point yet. So let's protect our parklands, make sure that our children and future generations are able to enjoy themselves by walking out in nature the way I did as a young man.
I support open space and parkland and recreation. I've invested millions of dollars into my district, into my parks, like Grant Park, like Corporal Fisher, like Bridge Park, Bridge Playground, Plimpton Playground, Ogden Plimpton, Mullally, Claremont Park, and many others. I think when you look at the opportunities, the city has been sitting on vacant land for years that has been underdeveloped and underutilized. If we can find a way to build housing and preserve parks, we should look at both of those opportunities. So as an example, Corporal Fisher, we had 2 parcels of land. One was on a boulder and one was in a fence. So what we did was we alienated the boulder part. That's going to be housing. It's going to be 100 units of affordable senior housing. And the other parcel that's also Corporal Fisher will be a $4.6 million park. So we were able to achieve affordable housing for seniors and a park for the local residents. If we can do that, I would support projects of that magnitude. But I realize it won't be that perfect. We will probably have one parcel where you have to decide between housing and or parks. So I want to look at the landscape, I want to look at the amenities, the population in the community, and I want to make sure that if we can build a park, then that would be great, but we also have a real need for housing. So I would take a lot of my input and guidance from the community board, from the residents, from the advocates, from the youth, from the seniors, talking to them to find out what the best balance could be so that we could use that land in a real transformative way.
Well, I am a big fan of our parks. I love that we are the greenest borough, and I think that we can be the borough with the greenest solutions. And in protecting our parklands is something that we must be very vigilant on. I think that the Bronx is so unique in its park space, and when any discussion should come about developing it, we got to look at what we're taking away. Are we hurting wildlife? Are we hurting an ecosystem that would, in effect, maybe hurt us? And are we giving an opportunity with the new development or changes to come? So very thorough conversations, very thorough planning is certainly something that needs to be done. But I don't want to see any parkland taken away. And I will be vigilant in making sure that we don't remove any of the acres, green spaces that we have here in the Bronx, because that's what makes us unique. Again, we're the greenest borough, and that's something that I think we should stay.
Well, I tell you, I'll give you a pledge right now. Parkland will not be converted while I'm Bronx Borough President. It's not going to happen in the next 4 years. I am very much in the belief that we need to protect our parks. We don't have enough in certain areas of the Bronx, so I know we are the greenest borough, and I intend to keep it that way.
So one of the great things that as a borough president, I have the power to have an impact and influence the ULURP process and our rezoning. I love parks. This is the borough parks. We have more parks in the Bronx than any other borough. We cannot afford to give an inch of it. We need those spaces. This is why I gave more funding to parks than any other elected official here in the Bronx, $47 million. As a matter of fact, all my parks are fully funded. Some are in design, some are being completed, and we cannot afford to give not an inch of our parks. I'm committed to our parks to stay as part. People need that green space. It's just so necessary.
Our next topic is on policing. There are sharply opposing views on public safety in our communities. On one hand, some community members call for more law enforcement involvement to counter rising crime and other quality of life issues. On the other hand, there has been a call in New York City and in the Bronx to defund the police to ensure community safety and redirect those funds to alternative resources that contribute to community safety. What are your views on public safety, defunding the police, and what do you see your role as BP to ensure a holistic approach to safety?
Defunding the police is a notion that's different to whoever you ask. For example, for me, if by defunding the police you mean create an environment where there's not sufficient funding for the police to work effectively, then obviously we're going down the wrong path. But we shouldn't also, by the same token, be allocating monies to buy heavy equipment, tanks, and robotic dogs to go into policing our community. So you have to strike a balance. Any effective law enforcement, any effective policing in our community is going to involve having a relationship between the local precincts and the community. There has to be respect both ways. And what I find a lot in the discussion about crime is a level of fear-mongering that doesn't help our community. So one of the things that I talk about is I was one of 7 senators that was part of a group that rewrote our criminal justice reform laws last year. Being an attorney by profession, representing an area where it has one of the highest crime rates, the leader of the Senate put me on this committee to draft essentially what we know as bail reform, speedy trials, and reforms that occurred with part of the legislation last year. So when I go into a precinct council meeting and a police officer says, or a person says, you know, the reason that the level of gun violence is increased in this county is because of bail reform. Well, that's not true. Bail reform, anybody who's caught with a gun, an illegal gun in the Bronx or any county in New York City or New York State, is eligible for bail. So if you get caught with a gun, you will have to pay bail. But when you talk about, for example, bail reform, let's talk about the injustices that usually happen in communities of color. So let's say that if my son were arrested for a minor offense, fortunately I was able to get an education, get a better job, I'm able to pay for my son to be released and won't spend a minute inside other than maybe a holding cell in a precinct. But a poor black or Latino person, for committing the same offense, will probably spend time in Rikers Island. So there's just an inherent injustice about where you spend, let's say, a particular night depends on your parents' income, on the zip code where you come from, and certainly the color of your skin. As a practitioner, I've seen judges on same offenses issue different rulings that just don't make sense to me, and I say, well, where's the difference? The difference is usually poverty, and usually is the color of the skin of the person. So you cannot have that level of injustice and think that you're going to have a criminal justice system that's going to prosper.
Everyone in the Bronx has a fundamental right to be safe in our community, no matter where you live. People are worried about the future of the city and the future of the Bronx. They are scared that they're going to be assaulted and attacked as they walk down the street. We have seen a rise in crime and hate crimes against Asian Americans and Jewish Americans and African Americans and Latinos. We've seen that all over the city. It is alarming and it's unacceptable. We always denounce violence in all forms. I've stood with many mothers and parents and advocates. I do a lot of work with the anti-gun violence organizations to make sure that we invest in their programs because they are a part of keeping people safe. We have to support the work of the NYPD, the good officers, the men and women that come to work every day that just want to provide a service and go home the same way they left. But we know that there are bad apples and we have to hold them accountable when they misuse and abuse their authority. Over the past several years, the City Council has passed a number of reform bills, the post-act surveillance, police related to prohibiting the chokehold. We also have to make sure that we look at programs like the New York City Crisis Management System, which we started several years ago, to look at gun violence from a holistic and healthcare perspective. Gun violence is a national crisis. It's a state of emergency, and we need the action from the federal government. We need federal intervention to get rid of the illegal handguns in our communities, but we also need to get to the root causes of why young people engage in violence in the first place. I do not believe a young person accused of a low-level nonviolent crime belongs in Rikers Island. We have ATI and ATD programs and restorative justice work that should keep young people out of the criminal justice system and not wait for them to get incarcerated and then give them a wealth of services, but do preventative work and not reactionary work. This is about balance. Last year when George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, the world saw with our own eyes what happened in Minneapolis, but we know that could have easily been New York City. So we diverted $1 billion in expense money from the NYPD to social services and youth programs because we had to do it. The public demanded we do that. So when you talk about defund, I think it means different things to different people, but at the end of the day, people want police presence. They don't want to see abusive cops misabusing their authority. They want safe streets, and they want programs for their young people. So we just have to find a balance in all of that work.
Yes, we must take a holistic approach, and it's not just one solution. It's not just about defunding. It's not just about reinvestments, but it is a collaboration of all that. I do think that the budget could be shaved down a little bit to help invest in areas where we need more help. Every year the budget has been increasing, and I do think COVID is a reason why there's an increase in crime this year. But I think that we need to look at and audit the NYPD to really see what they're doing with the money. This robot dog that we saw on what is it, Twitter like a couple weeks ago, why do we need that? Why? If we want to look at communities and why there's a spike in crime or why there is crime in the communities, we must know the reason, and the reason is poverty. So yes, maybe taking some money out of the NYPD and putting it toward community investments like community centers, youth development, workforce development, investing in community gardens, something like this that can help give people something else to do, and that is a reason why people fall into gang life. They're looking for community. We need to help strengthen our communities here, and if we do, maybe in turn then it can reduce the number of people that do fall into a life of crime. But when it comes to violence in and of itself, there is issues with police brutality, and there is issues and concerns with community violence, gun violence that we've seen. We've seen a spike in the gun shootings that have been happening. And I think those are two separate conversations, because when it comes to the police, we want to know that they are there to protect us and protect us only. So when we see situations of a police officer using lethal force for maybe no reason, we have to question that. We need to then look at what their training was. Why did they decide to pull out a gun or use a taser for a situation that maybe didn't even qualify for it? And that creates more safety between a police officer and an individual. And if it gets to that worst place, that the police officer shoots the gun, someone dies, someone's incredibly hurt, the same way we want accountability on everything else, like community violence and those that do commit crimes and those that do anything else wrong, there has to be accountability. That's why I support ending qualified immunity, because it's not fair that when one person does wrong, the whole precinct is protective of it and can fight and take blame and all that. So doing that and creating accountability will build trust again. And that's what we need. We need trust in our police, that they are there to protect us, not harass, not hurt us, and having better lines of communication. We have our precinct community councils, and I think that that's a great start, but they need to go deeper into the community. And we need to have different forces that are talking to community members, having these conversations about their concerns, what they're experiencing, and relaying that back to our precinct commanders, because they need to know how our community feels. They need to know what they're doing wrong, what they could do better, and that way we can create a better balance where there is safety and there's accountability and respect.
I'm sure everybody knows where I stand on this. We have the best police department in the world here in New York City. It's unfortunate that now we are in the situation that we have to now try to build a bridge that was actually broken by our elected officials, in my opinion. The silent majority of Bronxites really want more police officers. They're feeling unsafe. Violent crimes have increased 200% since last summer. 200%. The people that are being affected by the rise in crime are people that look like me. Young Latinos and young African Americans. So we have to be careful when we start yelling defund the police, because especially from outside groups, because the people that get affected are people that look like me. Now, when I say this, people hear that I support bad police behavior. Those are two separate things. I want more police because when you have more police presence, you have less crime. It's a fact. And right now, in order for us to do a holistic, like people say, a holistic reform on policing, we want to make sure that people are safe while we're doing the rest. We have violence interrupters out there that are getting paid $30, $40, and $50 million, and they're not interrupting crime. They're not interrupting violence, and yet we still fund them. There's no oversight. I want to put a stop to that. I want to make sure that if we have an oversight group that are supposed to be, if we have a group that's supposed to be stopping violence, that's what they're doing. But we don't see the cooperation with the police department. And number two, I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I tell our citizens, yes, we support the police. We don't support bad police behavior. And I want to be that bridge between the policing. One thing that I can tell you, I went 25 years in the NYPD, and I never got a complaint. So I have I can speak to this with, I think, a little bit of authority.
So let me work it a little backwards here. Actually, I started the Cure Violence program alongside with another council member. The most effective way to combat violence in the city of New York is the main reason why violence went down from 2014 until prior to the pandemic, where we take former gang members, crew members, we transform lives now. They end up working with the crew members and provide them jobs and be able to provide education. It's been deemed as the most effective program in the nation. This year, I call upon doubling of the funding to amplify their impact in our community is needed. In terms of the police, we need police. I mean, you can't have a community working without the police force. But what kind of policing do we need? We need responsible policing. And I don't think it's like either or. I think we could work together and again, I want to be the man in the middle to be able to work with the community and hear the concerns regarding policing and working with police department too, so they can understand how they could better serve, because at the end of the day, they're there for their community. And not for police defunding. And police defunding means a lot of things to a lot of people. It's a cutting fund, it's a transferring funds, but at the end of the day, I think that it's how those funds are allocated and to do it in an appropriate way so we could have the safety that everyone deserves.
The next is a rapid-fire yes or no question. Would you commit financing and resources for community-based broadband initiatives?
100%.
Yes.
Yes, because Wi-Fi and broadband is not a luxury anymore. It is absolutely a necessity.
Yes.
The short answer is yes. Rapid fire, 100%.
The next topic is NYCHA. The Bronx has the densest concentration of public housing per capita of any of the 5 boroughs. NYCHA's chairman is pushing to privatize 62,000 NYCHA apartments citywide and create a housing preservation trust that would take over decision-making power. The Housing Authority would operate and run day-to-day operations. Tenants citywide oppose this plan. Tell us about how you, as Bronx BP, would address this blueprint for change, as NYCHA calls it. Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, and what would you do to change or adapt it?
The issue with blueprint is really how the tenants feel. Again, there's a lot of misinformation about that process. In order to fix the problems with NYCHA, you have to allocate about $40 billion to cure most of the problems that you have there. That money's not available right now, so how do we get that? There's going to have to be some level of partnership between private equity and public funding. It's just no way around it. I don't see the federal government saying, by the way, the federal government has been defunding public housing since Ronald Reagan. The one exception was President Obama, and I'm hoping the current president will continue to fund it at higher levels. But we're not going to get $40 billion. Let's be honest about that. So what alternatives do we have? Well, we have to look at private equity or relationships or capital, private capital to work with public funding. But the linchpin of any successful program is to guarantee that anyone who lives in public housing has protections, has the rental protections, the lease protections, and is not displaced. So as long as you can convince me that there'll be no displacement, that the tenants will continue to enjoy their rights as tenants, their succession rights or otherwise, then you have to consider all options, and I would consider all options, but ultimately it's the decision of the tenants to live in the developments.
As a council member, I've invested over $15 million of my capital discretionary into NYCHA. NYCHA is dysfunctional. The city of New York has provided millions and billions of dollars for capital work, from roof repair to elevator to boiler, and we still are not seeing a lot of those projects come to fruition. Even with the COVID pandemic, NYCHA still is slow to spend city money, and it is unacceptable. They have a mismanagement problem. I do not support the blueprint. I stand with my tenants and the Citywide Council of Presidents. Out of those 62,000 units that stand to be privatized, I represent thousands of them from Claremont, Consolidated, and all of my units in my district. And I stand with my tenants because we need to make sure that whatever plan we come up with is supported by the tenants. The tenants have endured so much in NYCHA. They've been understanding, they've been cooperative, and they deserve better. They need to be engaged in a part of the process, and NYCHA has failed in messaging the blueprint on the the ground. I realize we have a $42 billion deficit with NYCHA. So even if we infuse money, we still have to make sure it's managed properly and the dollars are spent efficiently. Interior, exterior, the grounds, public safety, key fob, doors, lighting, elevators. I mean, it's just a nightmare when you see the way that residents in NYCHA live today, and it's not acceptable. The seniors, the veterans, the children deserve better. Most people in NYCHA are working class New Yorkers. They have a full-time job, they pay their rent on time, and they deserve better. So as borough president, I will invest my capital dollars into NYCHA, but we need to reform NYCHA. If we don't come up with a better plan, I've said to tenants, you don't like the blueprint, let's come up with our own blueprint plan, because we need the tenants to lead this movement, not NYCHA, not Chair Greg Russ. We need the tenants of NYCHA to lead this movement so that we can get the best plan to give us the $42 billion we need, but also we need a plan to operate efficiently and spend this money more wisely.
I mean, I think in essence it's a good thing because we want to improve our NYCHAs. You know, that's the bottom line for everybody. We've seen our NYCHA buildings, we've seen the many tapes and videos of walls crumbling, pipes leaking, still lead paint in our apartments. So the intention is very good in that sense. But if there are tenant leaders that are saying this can't work, that this is not helpful, then we got to listen to the tenant leaders. And we need them to come full force to the table. It's one thing, yes, to have your leaders come in, but bring the tenants. You know, maybe there's extra voices, maybe there's different experiences that leader doesn't know to bring forth in the argument. So we have to really organize, get them to the room, to the table, and make sure that we're hearing what is wrong and comparing it to what the plan already is to try to make it as perfect as possible.
Well, I still trying to determine, because I'm hearing positives on both sides. So I'm trying to determine if it's something that's good to implement. The jury's still out on my decision on that.
It is a bad thing. Let me be very clear. The Blueprint 2.0, as they call it, it is a bad thing. Let me tell you why. I have not met one tenant that is happy, NYCHA tenant that is happy with the Blueprint 2.0. And then having said that, I think the federal government and the state, they have totally failed us. Only 7% of the entire budget for NYCHA comes from the federal government and a measly 16% from the state. We are in the city, as council member and the mayor, we have to carry the rest of the load. We are in need of $40 billion. I think that the federal government and state should step up and do it all in one chunk. They can afford it. We can afford to do a lot of things. Trust me, the money is there. Especially now with the infrastructure bill that the President Biden is attempting to pass, and I believe he'll get it passed. That should be part of the package. And so I think it's non-working as it is. Every tenant, NYCHA president and council member and Donnie Barbara, the president, or all the council president, they all have told me this is a non-starter, and I'm standing with them 100%.
On a Bronx jail and criminal justice reform, your predecessor and numerous other elected officials who represent the South Bronx, along with local residents, are on the record opposing construction of a new jail in Mott Haven. If elected, would you support or oppose the city's wish to build a new jail in Mott Haven?
Well, here's the situation. When you talk about building jails, many of the advocates wanted to close Rikers forever. Well, guess where do you put individuals that have to be incarcerated if you close Rikers? You want to put these individuals as close as possible to their homes. You have 105,000 children in New York State that have one parent that's incarcerated. These kids suffer through trauma, and these kids are more likely to get involved in crimes themselves. You know what a determinant factor is to curb the level of involvement of these children in the future in terms of crime? Is to maintain a relationship with a parent that's incarcerated. It also reduces recidivism for those that are incarcerated. Having that bond with a family member is critical. And when I have visited as chair of the corrections committee, I visited over 19 facilities. And every single inmate indicated to me that they wish they could see and spend time with their children, those that had children. And so where do you build them? You know, you have to build them in areas where people will be able to maintain strong ties with those that are incarcerated. If that means that you may have to build something in the Bronx, then we have to build it in the Bronx. But build it in areas where you don't have a high concentration or density of people. And I think the city could have done that.
Senator, can we get a support or oppose just a quick?
I would oppose it here.
I support the closure of Rikers Island because I don't think it's a safe haven for detainees or staff or correction officers, anyone that works on the island. When the Rikers working group was formulated by former Chief Justice Jonathan Lippman, I support the recommendation of the Lippman Commission that looks at holistic, alternative to incarceration, restorative work, social services, but also from a borough-based model. I support the plan to build borough-based jails because I realize that we need places for people to be held as they await their day in court. There are people in our city, in our borough, that are accused of heinous, violent crimes, and there has to be a place for them. But we have to rehabilitate them while they're there. That's the problem with Rikers Island. People go into Rikers and they come out worse than they entered. As a borough of the Bronx House of Detention was long closed, but we have the barge that sits in Hunts Point. It's a boat. That boat needs to close because essentially the Bronx will have 2 jails if we build a borough-based jail and we have the barge that remains open. So any plan I support must close the barge first and then look at a borough-based model. But with the borough-based model, we don't want to just build a jail. We want to build, again, a neighborhood plan. So I want housing, supermarket, commercial retail, recreation, community space, local jobs, MWBE. I want a project labor agreement with developers because I want to make sure we look at people and not profits. And I want to make sure that we look at a neighborhood plan. We know that NIMBYism is real. No one wants a jail in their backyard. But when you talk to a mother or father that has lost their child to gun violence, they want justice for their loved ones. And we have to take that very personal because someone lost their life at the hands of someone else. There is a place for that person to be rehabilitated, and I believe a borough-based model approach is the best course and the best approach as compared to keeping Rikers Island open.
I already oppose it. Mott Haven is a community that has come so far in its revitalization, its development, and its quality of life, and to add a jail could, be that little dark cloud over it. And speaking with many activists, a community jail not near the courthouse is insufficient. We want those locations to be justice hubs, where yes, we have our jail, we have our court, we have everything else in the same vicinity, so families don't have to travel too far, don't have to jump around from building to building, and it's all centralized in one location. So yes, I oppose the Mott Haven jail.
I oppose it.
So as a matter of fact, I'm already on the record. I voted against that plan. I think that plan is flawed on many levels. First of all, it's too costly. We're talking about $10 billion. I mean, that's the $10 billion that we could use right now in NYCHA. And so right now, and yes, Rikers Island needs some renovation, and we could take $1 billion of that and be able to fix it. The second thing is our communities, we're overburdened here. With those type. Right now we have 2 locations, and now you're gonna add this location here, and a community that said we don't want it. On top of that, that location was to be for affordable housing, and the city gave the word that was going to be for affordable housing. So they betraying the community. I don't want it. There's all the candidates that voted for it who are running for borough president. I'm not. I did not, and I will use all the bully pulpit power that I have to fight it off. Staten Island, they're not getting one, and where their inmates are going to go. So it just again, inequities that I keep seeing in the system.
So just to clarify one detail that you brought up, though, you mentioned that $1 billion could be used to renovate Rikers, and that would be an acceptable solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Rikers needs to be renovated. It needs to be upgraded. I don't think right now the facility is meeting the needs of the inmates and the correctional officers that are there as well. We can make it safer for everyone in both sides, and so it definitely needs renovation. I mean, I've been to Rikers Island numerous times. I've gone to visit people, help family as a pastor than I am, and I also been there as an elected official, and each time I've seen that there's definitely a need, and both the inmates and the correction officers will tell you it needs to be renovated.
The following question is a rapid fire, so please try to answer yes or no. The community wants to know if the candidate would support a cannabis worker-owned cooperative in the Bronx, and will you help with the funding of the cooperative?
100%.
Yes, absolutely. Worker co-ops, yes.
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 Cooperative obviously will require for people to want it. And so I'm here to represent the interest, not my interest, the interest of the community.
So yes.
Yes, if the community wants it.
Thank you.
I'm not coming with my own agenda. I'm not trying to superimpose and move that agenda. As long as the community, this is what they want, yes, absolutely.
And that wraps up our candidate forum. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Senator
so much.
Sepulveda,
Thank you so
and
much.
we will review your qualifications for VP. Thank you.